Imagine, like, building the most technologically advanced, wealthy society on Earth. I mean, a place where all the economic metrics are just off the charts, their exports are dominating the globe, and the infrastructure looks like it literally belongs in the next century.
Right, like a total economic miracle.
Exactly. But then, you look inside those glittering skyscrapers and you realize the people living there are experiencing this profound, entirely unresolved social and spiritual crisis. Like, the spreadsheet is entirely green, but the reality on the ground feels um, deeply painful. And that is the ultimate paradox of modern development.
It really is, and it forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question about what we actually consider to be success. Because you can engineer the tallest buildings and the fastest internet networks, but none of that physical infrastructure actually dictates whether the people using it know how to live together.
Yeah, or if they even find any meaning in their lives.
Exactly. The physical stuff doesn't fix the human stuff.
And that tension right there is the entire focus of our deep dive today. Okay, let's unpack this because we are looking at a truly fascinating, intensely philosophical lecture. It was delivered in Busan, South Korea on April 19, 2026. And I should warn you, if you're expecting like a standard political stump speech about tax rates or trade deals,
Oh, yeah. Definitely throw that expectation right out the window.
seriously, this is a radical, highly unorthodox blueprint for how a modern nation actually evolves. It's so far beyond normal politics.
It really is. The source outlines what it calls this massive paradigm shift. It's basically analyzing a country that has reached the absolute peak of its economic climb and is now facing an existential choice. It either transitions from operating purely out of self-interest to taking on the role of a global savior, or it begins this rapid, inevitable decline.
Wow.
Yeah, and the great irony of this text is that to achieve this grand international mission of, global leadership, the nation has to start by tackling its most intimate, painful domestic crisis.
Right, they have to clean their own house first.
Yeah.
Because the speaker in this lecture frames this entire situation as a critical inflection point for nations, specifically pointing to South Korea as the prime example. And the warning the speaker gives to countries at this stage is surprisingly stark.
Yeah, it's a harsh warning. We connect this to the bigger picture. The underlying premise is that as nations develop, they naturally organize their people and their resources to generate power and wealth, right? That's just what they do.
Sure, it's basic development.
But there is a trap. The source argues that this organization often hardens into what the speaker terms a cartel.
A cartel, like a whole nation acting like a cartel.
Exactly. If that national structure turns entirely inward, like if it becomes this massive cartel that only seeks to enrich its own citizens and it views the rest of the globe merely as a resource to exploit or just a market to dominate, that nation is inadvertently engineering its own downfall.
So the source is essentially saying that the mechanics that helped you grow, that intense inward-focused cooperation and wealth accumulation, those become the exact mechanisms that will destroy you once you reach the top.
Yeah.
Like, congratulations, you got rich. Now what are you actually doing with it?
That is the pivotal question of the whole lecture. The speaker argues that at this mature stage of development, everything a country produces, I mean, its culture, its technology, its
Yeah.
corporate structures, its philosophies, all of it must fundamentally pivot to serve the international community.
Oh, wow. So they have to start giving it away, essentially.
Right, because if a nation tries to just hoard its wealth and knowledge, the natural order of the universe simply won't sustain its prosperity. The foundation will literally rot from the inside.
Reading through the text, it immediately made me think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but applied to an entire civilization.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. Because when a nation is developing, it's frantically focused on the bottom of that pyramid, food, shelter, basic security, raw economic output. And the source actually uses this beautiful, very distinct vocabulary for this. It calls all that physical material growth the power of the earth. Like, we use the earth's energy to build our physical bodies and our physical cities.
Yeah, think of Earth energy as the hardware of a society. It's the factories, the GDP, the physical infrastructure you build just to survive and assert yourself. But a supercomputer is useless and, frankly, kind of dangerous if the software running it is completely self-serving and glitchy.
Which is where the second half of the equation comes in.
Yeah.
Once you have that foundation, once you've grown up physically, you need a sort of national self-actualization. To actually operate on a global scale and have a positive impact, the source says you need wisdom. And crucially, wisdom doesn't come from the earth. The speaker describes wisdom as an energy provided by heaven.
And this is key. The mechanism for accessing that heavenly energy is strictly conditional.
What do you mean? Like, there are rules to get it.
Oh, absolutely. You don't get that wisdom just because you are rich or powerful. You only unlock that higher level software if your foundational intent is to serve the broader human society. This fundamentally rewrites the entire motivation behind industry and geopolitical power.
Okay, if you're listening to this and wondering how this totally abstract philosophy applies to the real, gritty world of geopolitics, the speaker uses a striking analogy that really caught my attention. It has to do with something as brutal and physical as weapons manufacturing.
Yeah, this part is intense. The source claims that even the manufacturing of advanced weaponry must be conducted strictly for global defense and peace.
Right.
Not for corporate profit margins, not to, intimidate your neighbors into submission. The lecture explicitly warns that if a nation builds weapons purely to monetize conflict or to enrich its own defense cartel, the very capacity and power to manufacture those weapons will eventually be stripped away by the natural order.
Okay, but I really have to push back on the text here because it feels like it's walking this massive moral tightrope, making high-quality, devastating weapons for peace. The source itself admits this is a paradox.
It is a massive paradox, yeah.
It argues that you build these incredible weapons as a deterrent so you can stand on the world stage and say, look at our technological capability, don't disrupt the peace. But almost immediately after establishing that, the speaker acknowledges that these so-called defensive weapons can be flipped into offensive tools in a heartbeat.
It is a precarious argument, but the text relies heavily on the concept of intent as the defining mechanism. The physical action of deploying a weapon might look identical from the outside, but the crucial difference, according to this philosophy, is the underlying intent driving the action.
So the intent changes the nature of the action itself.
Exactly. If a bad actor threatens the safety of the global community, deploying that deterrent is framed not as an act of nationalistic aggression, but as a necessary enforcement of global order.
So the weapon is justified only if it is acting as a shield for the world, rather than, a sword for the cartel. It's a really heavy responsibility. But I mean, you can't exactly preach global salvation and act as the world's moral shield when your own citizens are deeply unhappy, which completely explains why the speaker suddenly shifts focus from these grand macroscopic ideas of heavenly energy directly into South Korea's most agonizing domestic contradiction.
Yeah, because a nation cannot stabilize the globe if its own house is actively burning down. And the source highlights a glaring, just tragic statistic to illustrate this. South Korea is this brilliant, incredibly fast-paced, high-achieving society, right?
Oh, yeah. One of the greatest economic miracles of the 20th century.
Right. Yet, for over a decade, it has consistently ranked #1 globally in suicides among developed nations.
Yeah. And the speaker doesn't point this out just to be pessimistic or drag the country down. The text actually frames this specific tragedy as the ultimate definitive test for the nation. The logic goes, and this is fascinating, heaven gave you this incredibly complex problem precisely because you are the smartest, most advanced nation.
Right, like a final exam.
Exactly. If you can untangle the spiritual bankruptcy causing this crisis, you possess the wisdom to untangle any problem on Earth.
What's fascinating here is how they propose to solve it. To address this, the source introduces this mechanism called the Social Parents Club. Now, to be clear for you listening, this has nothing to do with biological parenting.
Right. It's not about raising actual kids.
No, the speaker is referring to the elites of society, the CEOs, the top intellectuals, cultural influencers, political leaders. The concept dictates that these individuals must step out of their silos, form a unified foundation, and basically take on the ultimate parental responsibility for the psychological and social welfare of the entire population.
Wait, but practically speaking, how does a CEO or a famous intellectual just declaring themselves a social parent actually stop a struggling person from taking their own life? Like, how does that work on the ground?
Well, it's about a radical restructuring of societal value and mentorship. The source argues that the suicide crisis isn't driven by a lack of food or shelter, right? It stems from a profound, crushing loss of meaning and direction in this hyper-competitive environment.
Oh, I see.
So these elites aren't just supposed to write philanthropic checks. They are tasked with utilizing their immense Earth resources to create entirely new educational frameworks and life philosophies. They basically have to provide the youth with a literal, actionable roadmap for existing and finding purpose in a modern, post-scarcity world.
And the urgency in the text is just palpable. This isn't framed as some theoretical thought experiment for the next generation to figure out. The speaker lays out a strict timeline, explicitly stating that the gathering of these social parents, the intense study, the preparation, it is all happening this year in 2026.
Yeah, they are not messing around.
Not at all. The goal is to establish this foundation rapidly and lead up to a massive public declaration of Project Zero Suicide.
The lecture makes it very clear that they are actively looking for a prominent leader from within this elite class to step forward, assume the role of the foundation's head, and officially launch the initiative. It's a call to immediate action.
There is a fantastic moment of meta-commentary in the transcript right around this point that I absolutely loved. The speaker is passionately describing the formation of this social parents club, and the audience in Buan naturally starts to applaud, and the speaker essentially stops them in their tracks.
Yeah, it's a very revealing interaction. It really shows the speaker's total rejection of, like, performative engagement.
Yeah, they literally ask the audience, are you clapping because you actually understand and embody this, or are you just clapping out of habit? They warn the crowd not to act like people at a revival who just yell amen on cue without actually internalizing the message. The speaker insists that applause is meaningless unless the teaching truly aligns with a righteous, deeply understood purpose that the audience is willing to bleed for.
Because passive agreement just won't survive the difficulty of the task ahead. The source envisions a literal domino effect stemming from this domestic effort. If this foundation of elites can actually restructure society enough to bring the suicide rate down to zero, South Korea instantly transcends its status as an economic powerhouse and becomes the global headquarters for profound social healing.
Because they successfully solved the hardest, most intractable case of modern existential dread. If you can fix it there, you can fix it anywhere.
Precisely. Once that blueprint is proven domestically, the source states that South Korea will then establish a global organization. They will send out formal guidelines and communications to the rest of the world, ultimately leading to a World Zero Suicide Declaration. So, healing the internal wound isn't just nice for the citizens, it is the absolute prerequisite for the nation's global mission.
It is a breathtakingly ambitious roadmap, but it logically makes you wonder, if suicide is the ultimate tragic symptom of this societal sickness, what is the underlying disease they're actually trying to cure? Because obviously, throwing more money at the problem hasn't worked at all. The economic spreadsheet is already perfect.
Right.
This is where the narrative shifts to redefine the very nature of human suffering.
And this section of the text is deeply applicable to almost any modern industrialized society. The source completely redefines what it means to be a welfare recipient.
Yeah.
Normally, we associate that term with the lack of physical resources, right? Government assistance, food stamps, subsidized housing.
Right. We define welfare entirely by the absence of earth energy, as the text calls it.
But according to this lecture, a welfare recipient is anyone who is struggling, suffering, or lacks a meaningful role in the broader society. Think about your own life for a second. Under this new definition, you don't need to be broke to be a welfare recipient. If you have millions in the bank but you are miserable, directionless, or completely isolated from your community, this text considers you a welfare recipient. You are starving spiritually.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the speaker argues that the root cause of this widespread suffering is shockingly simple. People simply don't know the right way to live in this new hyper-advanced era. They have conquered the physical world, but they haven't been taught how to exist at this inflection point. They have all the physical energy of the earth, but absolutely none of the wisdom of heaven.
And if an entire society is spiritually starving like this, traditional political solutions just won't work. You can't pass a law to give people meaning.
Which brings us to a really sharp, almost humorous twist the speaker puts on a famous historical quote. The text references a well-known saying from South Korea's first president, Syngman Rhee, which is, "United we stand, divided we fall." I mean, every culture has a version of this, right? It's the standard, unquestioned call for national unity.
Yeah, it's the rallying cry of almost every political movement in history.
Right. But the speaker poses this brilliant counter-question to the audience. They ask, do we survive if we unite as thugs?
It's such a fantastic way to expose the flaw in demanding cohesion without a moral framework.
It completely deconstructs the idea that unity is inherently good. Because if you bring a massive group of people together who are all spiritually starving, who are entirely self-interested, who are operating like a massive cartel, you haven't solved anything. You've just created a bigger, more powerful, more dangerous gang of thugs.
The brilliant insight here is that social cohesion without a higher moral compass is just organized corruption. The speaker is warning that nationalism, when it's totally devoid of a global humanitarian purpose, inevitably devolves into that thug mentality. Unity means absolutely nothing without the right spirit guiding it.
So what is that guiding spirit? If you can't just group people together and expect peace, what is the philosophical software that is supposed to run this society?
The text points to a very specific, deeply rooted concept, the Hongik vision. More specifically, Hongik Ingen, which is an ancient foundational philosophy of Korea. Broadly translated, it means living for the ultimate purpose of bringing benefit to all of humanity.
Wow. So it's the exact opposite of the cartel mindset.
Precisely. However, the expert giving the lecture points out a very sad modern reality regarding this concept.
Wait, what happened to it?
Well, the text notes that this beautiful universal philosophy has been tainted by modern political tribalism. The speaker mentions a phenomenon in Korea referred to as color theory.
Oh, like ideological smearing, where a universal positive idea gets hijacked by a specific political party and suddenly half the country hates it just because of the association.
Exactly. The concept of Hongik got dragged into modern partisan mudslinging. So now, when people hear the phrase, they view it with suspicion, assuming it's part of some weird partisan agenda. And I should note, the source is remarkably impartial about this reality. It doesn't take a side or blame a specific faction. Instead, it urges these social parents to cut through the political noise and actively reclaim the concept.
They just have to strip all that partisan color away from it.
Yes, they need to proudly pick up the mantle of Hongikingen, not as a cheap political slogan, but as a sweeping, undeniable human peace project.
Because if you strip away the modern political baggage, the core message of Hongik is exactly what that heavenly wisdom requires, right? You must utilize your wealth, your technology, and your society to actively work for the benefit of others.
And the source insists that this human peace project must be modeled perfectly in South Korea first, resolving their own tragic internal contradictions. By doing so, they create an undeniable moral and practical environment that the rest of the world has no choice but to emulate.
It is just a massive, sweeping vision of societal evolution. I mean, we started by looking at a standard economic spreadsheet, and we ended up unpacking a blueprint for global spiritual transformation. We've traced how a nation must transition from being a self-interested cartel to becoming a global servant, relying on heavenly wisdom rather than just earthly resources.
Right.
And we've explored the necessity of solving the deepest internal wounds, like a staggering suicide crisis, by empowering the cultural and economic elites to become social parents. And we learned that to actually pull this off, society has to totally redefine what it means to be a welfare recipient, replacing confusion and isolation with the reclaimed universal vision of benefiting humanity.
It brilliantly connects the macroeconomics and geopolitics of a nation directly to the individual psychological reality of its citizens.
So what does this all mean? Like, for you listening right now, how do we process a blueprint designed for an entire country and apply it to our own lives?
I think the text invites a very direct, somewhat uncomfortable personal audit. When you achieve your own personal growth, maybe you secure that massive promotion, you build your wealth, you get your physical life in perfect order. How do you ensure that you don't just become an isolated cartel of one?
Oh, a cartel of one. That's a great way to put it.
The source challenges you to look at your daily existence. Even if your bank account is full, are you struggling to find a reason to get out of bed? Are you operating without a meaningful outward-facing purpose? Because if you are under this new philosophical definition, you might be a welfare recipient, desperately in need of heavenly wisdom.
That is a staggering thought that completely flips the script on what a successful life looks like. And the source explicitly states what it considers to be an unbreakable rule of nature. Peace for one nation is absolutely impossible unless it is actively working to bring peace to the rest of the world. You cannot build a wall high enough to hoard peace.
Attempting to do so violates the very laws of the energy we discussed. It just guarantees eventual collapse.
Exactly. So I'll leave you with this final thought to mull over as you go about your day. If that rule of nature is true on a macro, global level, what does it actually mean for us as individuals? Can any of us truly find lasting personal peace in isolation? Or is our own happiness, our own genuine success, entirely dependent on how much we are actively helping the people around us find theirs? Because if the philosophy in this lecture is right, your spreadsheet might tell you you're the richest person in the room, but until your life is actively working to benefit the person sitting next to you, you haven't even begun to truly live.